I felt a weird tingling sensation in my legs when I woke up alone, restrained to an operating table without a clue what was happening. I looked around and saw myself hooked up to lots of machines and had a drip in my arm. And the worst thing was, I had no idea where I was. It was like I had been drugged or my memory had been wiped without a clue where I've been before this moment. This was the scariest moment of my life. I had no idea what to do. I felt a sharp pain in my stomach, my head felt fuzzy, and my mouth was dry. I tried to shout out for help, but my voice just came out as a croak. I couldn't move my limbs. I was so frightened. I was all alone, and no one could hear me call for help. After a few minutes, a woman came into the room. She was dressed in a white robe, and her face was covered in a white mask. She looked like a nurse you'd see in a horror movie. Was I in a hospital? When she noticed that I was awake, she started talking to me in a language I didn't understand. Her tone was weird and aggressive, and I had no idea what she was saying. I started moving my hands and legs, trying to release myself from the machines I was hooked up to. "Get me out of here!" I screamed in pain. But the terror didn't stop there. The scary woman walked over to me and pulled back the blanket covering me and lifted up my gown, which revealed a large bandage on my stomach. What had they done to me? I cried and started to scream louder. With a quick move, I managed to release my hand and I ripped the bandage off even though it hurt and saw a fresh scar and stitches underneath. I had been cut open. All kinds of thoughts started racing through my head. Maybe I had been drugged and someone had taken me to sell my organs on the black market. Or maybe I had been kidnapped and was going to be held for ransom until my mom and dad paid the kidnappers their life savings. Or maybe I'd be murdered and my family would never find my body. It was then that I completely lost it. I screamed more and more and started kicking and hitting out at the nurse. I have to say I'm not usually a violent person. I was just so frightened that I lost all control. Then an even worse pain set in and I looked down at my stomach where the pain was coming from. My stitches had blood coming out of them. The nurse pressed an alarm and more nurses ran in. 2 of them strapped my arms down and another strapped down my legs. I was now really frightened. I was trapped and they could do whatever they wanted to me and I was powerless to stop them. Then a doctor came in and got close to the bed. He was tall and had a mean look on his face. Then he did something that made me even more scared. I was so busy looking at his face that I didn't see what he did, but I felt a sharp pain in my arm. I didn't know what it was, but my vision started to blur and I slowly started falling asleep. He must have given me something to knock me out. I couldn't move and I couldn't resist it anymore. My eyes closed and I was powerless to open them. I didn't know how much time had passed before I woke up the second time, but when I looked beside me, I saw a plate of food that looked weird. I made a guess that this food was for me. Everything they were serving looked mashed and smelled disgusting, but I was very hungry and ended up eating most of it. The room was empty and the drug's effect was wearing off, and that's when I started to remember where I was last before I came here. I knew I wasn't in my home country because not too long ago I was traveling abroad with my 2 besties, Ali and Dahlia, for my 14th birthday. We weren't alone though, my father came with us. My head hurt and I started panicking again when the memory was coming back to me. I knew I was with them not too long ago in the streets of Malaysia. We were eating fried squids from a food chain, but something really bad had happened. The streets were so crowded, and as I was walking with my father and friends, I started feeling a sharp pain in my stomach after all the food I ate. I assumed that it was normal because I was trying out new food, and that's when my father and 2 friends had disappeared. I couldn't see them anymore, and I became very anxious as the pain in my stomach got worse and worse. And that was the last thing I remembered, being lost in a foreign country alone, which explained the whole situation I was in at the moment. Obviously, a gang had kidnapped me after noticing how clueless and lost I was. Oh my god, everything was finally making sense, and I started getting into a state of terror I never felt before. I needed to get out of there right now. My thoughts were disturbed as another person came in. It was the same woman with the white mask, and this time she had pills in her hands that she wanted me to take. When I said no, 2 other men came in and I knew I had to do it, so I decided to play it smart and took the pills and hid them under my tongue and spit it out as soon as they left the room. At that moment, I knew I had to find a way to leave this place, and that's exactly what I did the next morning. After I woke up, a man with a blue mask was standing over me. I was dizzy and felt too weak to move despite being super scared. I looked at the person standing over me with tears in my eyes and asked him politely if I could leave. I begged him in hopes that he'll feel sorry enough for me to let me go. To my shock, this guy with the blue mask called another man who seemed to speak some English, and when I repeated that I needed to leave, he told me with a loud voice, "Money or no leave." "I don't have any money," I screamed, and he replied, "This a big problem. Your mom and dad will pay." It seemed like it didn't matter how much I begged them to let me go. They couldn't care less about my well-being. Only God knows what they would do to me if I didn't pay them. Would they hurt me, or had they already started removing my organs to sell? I started crying, even though I tried to talk and reason with the man. I couldn't help it. I just cried and cried. Eventually, the two men gave up and left me alone in the room. After a while, I managed to calm myself down and realized what I needed to do. I had to escape. My arms and legs were still restrained and they were really tight, but after a lot of wriggling, I managed to pull my left arm free. Then I managed to undo the restraints on my right arm and my legs. I sat up. I felt lightheaded and my stomach hurt, but I didn't care. I looked down at myself. I was just wearing a gown and my feet were bare. I looked around the room and saw a bag with some clothes and shoes which looked kind of familiar. I tried to get out of bed, but I felt a sharp pain in my arm. I looked at it and saw the drip still attached. I pulled it out and had to stifle a scream. It hurt so much, and my blood spurted across the room as it came out. Somehow I managed to put on the clothes and shoes. I opened the door a crack. It was an empty corridor outside. I knew this could be my only chance before my kidnappers came back. I ran out of the room and down the corridor. I got to the end and there was a door I pushed open. On the other side were loads of people and beds and surrounded by people in masks and robes. The two men who had shouted at me were there too. When they saw me, they ran towards me. They looked so angry. I looked around. I needed to get out. I saw a door leading outside. I ran to it and flung myself against it. I was so dizzy that I could barely hold myself up. I fell outside in a heap on the floor, but I knew I couldn't stop. I stood up and started running. I was in a country that I knew nothing in. Everything looked foreign. The buildings looked different, the cars looked different, and so did the people. I honestly had no plan of how I should get by. But that didn't matter. I just knew that I needed to get away from the place I was being held captive in. I got up and ran, even though I could hear shouting behind me. But after a while, my legs gave way and I collapsed on the floor. I couldn't get up, so I started to crawl, but soon I felt arms around me. I screamed and shouted that I was being kidnapped, but everyone carried on and ignored me. Soon I felt a stabbing pain in my arm again, and it all went dark. As the light was fading, I just felt that this was the end. I wanted to give up. It was dark for a long time before something really strange happened. I woke up after I heard loud voices in my room. When I opened my eyes, I saw that there were 3 policemen standing over there and chatting with my kidnappers. Oh my God! They kidnapped me! I screamed, but the policemen looked like they had no idea what I was saying. How could this situation even be real? They need to catch these bad guys and help me find my parents. But suddenly, I heard familiar voices, and then my mom and dad came in a hurry through my door. They looked so relieved to see me. My mom even started crying, and my kidnappers were standing right beside them, smiling. I screamed, "They kidnapped me!" But that's when my father and mother started laughing and called me silly. "These are doctors," my parents said. Then they explained that I wasn't kidnapped. It was something totally different. After I got lost the other day, my dad couldn't find me, and when he got back to the place I was gone. Apparently, as I was panicking while suffering from severe pain in my stomach, I had fainted on the sidewalk and I had to be transmitted to a hospital quickly. Later on, the doctors discovered that my appendix had burst. They said that the shock, stress, and new food I ate must have affected it. It also took my parents a while before they actually figured out where I was, which had also given them their own share of stress. Eventually, I was super glad that this whole nightmare passed. And oh, I had to apologize so many times to the doctors who were treating me for the hard time I gave them. Have you ever been rushed to a hospital? Or maybe you've been in a situation similar to mine?
As if the last year of school before college wasn't stressful enough, my dad got himself fired and we had to move to a new city so he could find a new job. It wouldn't have been so bad, except Dad was a teacher at my school, so everyone knew what he'd done. It was one of the worst things to happen to us since Mom died when I was 12, but this time it was all Dad's fault. You see, he was having an affair with the principal's wife, and someone in my grade filmed them and shared it across social media. I could have stayed at this school and finished my exams, but let's be honest, I'd never live it down. I lasted about 3 days before I went to the principal and told him I was leaving. He didn't even look at me. He just said, "You should be ashamed of your dad. Get out of my school." When I was emptying out my locker, one guy came up to me and said that me and my dad were a disgrace, and I shouldn't show my face in this town again. I couldn't get out of there fast enough. So Dad and I packed up and moved, leaving our old life behind. I was miserable at first. The video was still viral, and I even thought about asking Dad if I could change my surname to Mom's old name, just so I wouldn't have to be associated with it all. Dad couldn't find a job anywhere. Everyone recognized him from the video, and some newspapers had written about it too. It was a nightmare. I knew I'd have to start at a new school so I could sit my final exams, so I decided to try and disguise myself. I cut my long hair into a pixie cut and bleached it blonde. Then I got my nose pierced. On the first day, Dad offered to drive me, but I told him I'd walk, just in case anyone recognized him. I knew I was being mean to him, but I didn't care. He'd ruined my reputation, and I wasn't about to let him do it again. As I was walking to school, I wasn't paying attention, and I bumped into a young guy. "Hey, watch it," he said. "I'm blind." I apologized, then looked back at him. Wow, I'd never have known he was blind. And then I got an idea. I reached into my bag and put on my sunglasses, and then when I got closer to this school, I held onto the wall and walked alongside it slowly. I could see people looking at me, but I didn't care. A few people started whispering, and I let go of the wall. What was I even doing? But then a girl came up to me and introduced herself as Elsie and took me by the arm and offered to help me walk to class. She said her brother was blind too, so she knew how difficult it could be sometimes. Well, too late now. I'd started this, so I just have to play along. I mean, how hard could it be? I told her I was new around here and this was my first day. She seemed so excited. She started describing things to me, like where the girls' bathroom was, and then she took me to register, and I was so sure the principal would know I was lying. But it seemed this school took disability seriously. For the first time in ages, I felt like people actually cared about me. Elsie was assigned as my guide, and that first morning passed in a blur. When she introduced me to her boyfriend at lunch, I had to stop myself from staring at him. He was such a babe. But then I realized I could stare all I wanted because he obviously thought I couldn't see him. And when Elsie had her back turned, I could see him checking me out, looking me up and down. And from the way his mouth was hanging open, it was clear he thought I looked good. It was like a whole new world had opened up. As soon as people found out I was blind, they did all kinds of things in front of me. One guy was picking his nose, and then when we went to the bathroom, Elsie didn't even close the door. It was pretty awkward, but what could I do? Surely someone would catch me out. And yup, sure enough, in the afternoon, things went downhill. Elsie dropped me off at the classroom for people with special needs, and then she just left me there. I looked around me and realized people there seriously had proper disabilities and learning difficulties. I wanted to scream that I was a fraud and run out, but the teacher came over to me and gave me a hug, and I was reminded why I was doing this. Anything to avoid being the girl whose dad got fired because of an affair. But then she put a book in front of me, and I realized it was Braille, and my heart almost stopped. How was I supposed to know what this book was about? I had no clue how to read it. I had to get out of there. I told her I wasn't feeling very well, and then I reached out to grab onto the chair in front of me so I could feel my way out of the classroom. But I didn't even realize how hard I'd pulled it, or the fact there was someone sitting in it. And the next moment, the chair was falling on top of me, and then a girl fell onto the floor. I just lay there trying not to cry. How had I not seen her sitting there? This whole faking being blind thing was starting to mess with me. Then it got worse. She landed on her arm and broke it. She was actually blind, which made me feel so bad. And no one was even angry with me because they all assumed I couldn't see. The teacher ordered an ambulance for the blind girl and offered to call my parents to pick me up. And I panicked and said my dad was sick and my mom had passed away years ago. The teacher felt so bad for me and said I could rest in her office until the end of the day, and then she'd drive me home. I sat in the teacher's office and waited, and then eventually I decided to leave without her noticing. I left a note thanking her for looking after me. I wrote it with my left hand, of course, so it would look realistic, and then I snuck out. Everyone was in class, so I just walked out of there like normal and headed home. When I got home, Dad was in a good mood. He'd got a job interview and he had a date that night. I just ignored him and went to my room. What a crazy first day! The next day, Elsie was waiting for me at the gate, and I had to pretend I didn't see her and walk straight past her, but she grabbed my hand and helped me to class again. Then my teacher was there to welcome me, and she said she had some exciting news, that seeing as I was 18 and blind, and my dad was sick, I could claim some benefits to help me out. I couldn't believe it! Jackpot! Maybe being blind wasn't so bad after all. That morning I had gym class, which I wasn't expecting. I thought another perk of being blind would be that I got to skip sports and stuff. But no, it was so humiliating. It was a swimming class. The gym teacher gave me a swimsuit and I put it on backwards, thinking that would be more realistic. But our special needs department teacher rolled her eyes at me and said that by now surely I knew how to dress myself. She'd been so nice to me up until now. I didn't get it. I kept watching her and she was constantly looking at her phone. The rest of the day dragged by. Faking being blind was hard work. After school, I decided to go check out the mall. I wore my sunglasses in case anyone from school saw me. Anyway, the mall was pretty lame, so I bought a milkshake and decided to leave. Suddenly, I saw Elsie and her boyfriend, and I panicked. I was playing on my phone, and I was like, that's it, my act is up. They were kissing, so I walked by quickly, hoping they wouldn't see me. And then I realized something. It wasn't Elsie he was kissing. I looked right at him, and he froze and opened his mouth to say something. Then I heard him whisper under his breath, "Never mind, she's blind. Phew." Except I wasn't blind, mister, and you have officially been caught in the act. I walked back around, hid behind the fountain, and quickly snapped a pic of them kissing. Elsie deserved better. I looked her up on Instagram and sent her a private message with the photo. She replied straight away saying, "Who is this? Why are you trying to ruin my relationship?" And then it clicked. My Instagram handle wasn't my name, and my pic looked nothing like me. Oh yeah, and I was blind. Obviously she didn't know it was me. Well, at least she now knew that her boyfriend was a lying, cheating. Over the next few days, Elsie didn't come to school, and I regretted sending her that photo. If she found out it had been me who sent it, I'd probably have lost my only friend. I could see her boyfriend looking at me in a horrible way, but I just kept my head down. She must have told him someone had seen him that day. Was he on to me? He definitely was, because on Friday afternoon, I saw him going into my locker and taking my phone. It took all my strength not to jump out at him and stop him, but it was too late. He had taken it. I hurried home wondering what I could do. He'd see all the photos and figure out I'd been faking it. I could report my phone missing, but I had no proof that it was him that had done it. I couldn't exactly say I'd seen him. I just wanted to get home to try and figure out what I'd do next. Except that was not what happened. My dad had invited his date over, and as soon as I walked through the door, he told me to get changed and come join him in the kitchen. Great, just what I needed. I was chopping carrots when she arrived. I turned around as my dad introduced her. "Allison, sweetie, come meet my new girlfriend, Susan." I literally just missed my foot. I dropped the knife right out of my hand and stared in shock. "Oh no, Allison, are you okay? Wow, what a coincidence. You shouldn't be using sharp knives. Come on, Kevin, surely you know better than that," she said. "Hang on, you two know each other?" my dad said. "Why, yes, of course. I'm Allison's teacher. Why didn't you mention your daughter was blind? I had no idea you were her father. In fact, she told me her father was sick." I stood there, my skin burning with shame. I had to run. This was my absolute worst nightmare. "Allison!" my dad screamed, and that was how I got caught. I'd faked being blind because I just wanted people to like me and not associate me with my dad's mistakes. And now I'd gone and messed up everything, including my want to be with a man who'd raised a daughter like me. I guess I was just as bad as my dad. Like father, like daughter. I wish I could say it all blew over after that and that I went back to school the following Monday and started afresh. Nope, life doesn't work like that. I was expelled, of course. And that Monday after school, there was a knock at the door. Elsie was standing there and I held my breath, assuming she was about to go crazy at me. But instead, she just handed me my phone. She said she'd been angry to find out I'd been lying about being blind, especially as her brother was blind, and it wasn't okay to joke about this kind of thing. But then she said I'd saved her from dating a cheater, and she was so grateful. I was shocked. That was not how I expected her to react. She said she'd broken up with her boyfriend and that he'd been suspended for stealing. "So, you still want to be my friend?" I asked her. And she did! I couldn't believe it. Sure, I could have saved myself a whole lot of trouble if I hadn't faked being blind, but then would I have discovered that Elsie's ex was bad news? And would Elsie have befriended me in the first place? There were just two small problems. I had to finish school, and I had to find a way to help my dad. He was so depressed